Before I start, I just want to say that as settler descendant who grew up on the beautiful and nourishing lands in what is now referred to as New Brunswick, I honor the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq peoples. And I also recognize and honor the land that I'm working and living on, Treaty 6 and homeland of the Métis. So today I will introduce Resolve Saskatchewan, provide a very brief overview of one research project responding to women who experience intimate partner violence in rural municipalities across the prairies. And then I will spend more time talking about the significance of natural supports in the context of some of those findings. And my goal or my hope is that the focus on natural supports will be relevant somehow to the work that each of you is doing. So very briefly, Resolve, and I see we have a member in our group from Alberta who is connected with Resolve. Resolve is a prairie-based tri-provincial network with offices in Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. It coordinates and supports research aimed at ending violence with a particular focus on gendered violence. Dr. Jordan Cummings is the director of Resolve Saskatchewan, and I will be only speaking to the data from Saskatchewan. So Dr. Cummings is a psychology professor at the University of Saskatchewan, and I want to pass on her regrets. She had really hoped to join me to present this, but was unable to, and is very disappointed about that. So the project I'm going to talk about today, and I want to say it was presented at the PAVS conference, one aspect of this with Crystal Giesbrecht, research director at PAVS. And we are also co-authoring a paper on a different aspect of this, Dr. Carolyn Brooks, myself, and Crystal Giesbrecht. So the talk today will be different again from that information. So the project overall was coordinated between the three regional offices, but I'm only going to present a summary of the findings specific to Saskatchewan. So the project today I'm talking about, it was tri-provincial, like I said. The team that led the tri-provincial project, but as you can see, Saskatchewan project was led by myself, Dr. Carolyn Brooks, and the community partner was PAVS, Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services. Saskatchewan, Crystal Giesbrecht was the person who led that. And then Kayla Arisman was the research assistant with the project. So the rationale, according to Stats Canada, Saskatchewan has the highest rate of reported intimate partner violence among all the provinces and more than double the national rate. And we know that the reported rates are just the tip of the iceberg. It's known that there is significant underreporting of intimate partner violence. And we also know that Saskatchewan rates of domestic homicide is higher than the national average. I'm skipping through this very quickly to get to the most important part, which is the voice of the participants here. So in rural areas, are under-researched when it comes to intimate partner and gendered violence. The rate of intimate partner violence reported in rural areas is over double that reported in urban areas. And just in the last 10 years, there were 718 cases of domestic homicide involving 815 victims. And about a third of these killings took place in rural areas. So the purpose of the broad study was to explore rural women's experience of intimate partner violence and help seeking. And again, we did it by province. So this is Saskatchewan findings. The methods of the broader project, there was an environmental scan of existing services, interviews. We had 13 participants with survivors, and then 13 participants who were service providers. And then we came up with geographic information system mapping. And the GIS mapping really just shows the formal supports around the province. So the environmental scan basically provided a story map, and that's presented in the summary report that I will give access to at the end of the talk. So really the formal supports, what we mean by that would be shelters, counseling services, sexual assault services, victim services, RCMP, and that kind of thing. And then the types of abuse that the participants identified included a number of different forms of abuse: physical, coercive control, sexual violence and coercion, emotional, verbal abuse and threats, psychological abuse, economic isolation, threats to harm animals, stalking, and harassment after separation. And the nature of the abuse is particularly significant given the rural context. For example, isolation is exacerbated for rural women, as is economic abuse. A partner can control a person's, the woman's ability to go to town, go to the store, get the things she needs. One research participant stated that she felt she could have left easier if she was down the block from a family member. But where she was, it was a challenge to get anywhere, especially because her partner controlled all the finances. Challenges, these are overall findings again. Challenges faced by the rural woman included lack of transportation, limited employment in small towns and on First Nations. Lack of daycare in and of itself was an issue, and it also limited employment opportunities, financial resources, support to address finances, care for companion animals and livestock, fear connected to firearms in the house, normalization, and that's a big aspect of the rural normalization of IPV within the community. And by IPV, I should say intimate partner violence and isolation. So formal supports address a number of the needs, but they do not address all of these challenges. So avenues for support in rural areas include formal supports like I just mentioned, shelters and such in general, like hospitals, RCMP. Travel to urban centers was another avenue to address those challenges, but they had to find their way to urban centers where there were more supports available. Online access became more available to women in rural regions through COVID, and so that was a bonus. And then natural supports, and this is where we get into the exciting part today. So what do I mean by natural supports? Those are the relationships that occur every day in our everyday lives. They usually involve friends, coworkers, neighbors, roommates, and acquaintances. And survivors of violence are known. There's been a little bit of research on natural supports in rural regions, but not very little. But what we do know is that survivors of violence more commonly utilize informal supports, sources of support than formal. More than 80% of women in one study reported using at least one form of informal support after violence. And friends and female members of victims are the most utilized natural support and generally have been considered the most helpful or useful. And there is, like I said, little research on the impact of natural supports in rural Canada. So I want to point out an inconsistency. In the literature, 3 terms have been used interchangeably. One is for what I'm talking about: social, informal, and natural supports. So I use the term natural supports unless, like the next slide, another term is used in the research I'm drawing from. So I'm using them interchangeably, even though there is a lot of discussion, as you can imagine, within and between. So social or natural supports. One author I looked at, Barrett, said the term social support has been particularly examined in the trauma literature, and it's a broad construct that covers a number of domains, in particular these 3. And so I will frame my research findings around these 3: social embeddedness, perceived social support, and enacted support. So these researchers tend to use social support for what I refer to as natural support, informal support. So what do I mean by social embeddedness? It's a psychological sense of community or belonging. And like I said, that's particularly important in rural communities. We found a number of the participants alluded to this dynamic of belonging, something unique about the farm, about the country, about rural life. One person stated, this is more than just about land. It's more than just about business, like farm families. You know, when it comes to the land, that is hugely emotional. So it's hard to describe this social embeddedness, but it comes through clearly in a lot of the the data that we got. And really it's about community or belonging. It's not that it doesn't exist in urban centers, but it seems to be more salient in rural. So this person, this is another example of social embeddedness. The way I grew up, I was with my dad constantly. We went to sweats, powwows, and youth conferences. Me and my dad really went to all these things. And just with what I believe in, with talking to all the elders I did in my life, knowing my dad's story, that's what I really held on to throughout my life. So to me, that gives a really good sense of what we mean by community or belonging or psychological social embeddedness. So what do we mean by perceived social support? And again, I think this is incredibly important, and I have yet to see any research done on this other than referenced in this literature around trauma. And we mean one's perception of the availability and adequacy of different forms of support in a person's social setting. So one person said, there were times when I was glad we were in rural or a smaller town, because I just felt people would notice if something occurred. So there's this general sense that this person had that because she lived in a rural space setting, she had access to a lot more support that people would notice. That worked both ways, of course, but that's what we mean by perceived social support. And that, I think, supported women, that sense of they were safe, they could go for support, encourage them to actually access support. And now enacted support, and that is about the specific forms of support actually provided to a person by others. In particular, we found in this research project that enacted support came from family, friends, employers, pets, livestock, neighbors, and community members. So I'm going to give a few examples of each of those. So, of course, support from family spoke volumes. There are a number of women who identify family members. This person said, I really turned to my family. It was really my mom and dad who helped me through everything. A woman talked about how her youngest sister just told her like it is. And she said other people comforted her, but what she really needed was what her younger sister did that no one else did, just told her exactly what she thought. And she found that really useful. There was a lot of conversation about social support from friends, enacted support. 5 of the women told their friends about the abuse they were experiencing, and they found their supports invaluable in leaving the relationship. So it really had that strong of an effect. One person explained, he hit me and pushed me into a wall outside the bar that all my friends were in, and they saw that. And of course they came rushing out, and my guy friends wanted to fight him. And my girlfriends wanted to comfort me, make sure I was okay. And that was it. When other people got dragged into it, that was it. As soon as her friends were involved, she made the decision to leave. Another research participant said, I had 2 really close girlfriends that I relied on actually through a lot of it, and who helped me out and knew almost everything, especially near the end. So another form of enacted support. Enacted support with friends came also in the form of pets and livestock. And that was a strong, actually Saskatchewan findings were stronger than Alberta and Manitoba when it came to pets and livestock. One person said, I had called my friend who was looking after the dogs, and she had taken all the dogs and all the cats out of the house and taken them to my mom's house. So I knew they were safe. I couldn't do anything about the horses, but the dogs and cats were safe. Another person said her one horse is staying at my best friend's house, my best friend's aunt's house, and then she's been riding him. And my other one is at my mom's. So that's enacted support, physically doing something so the woman could get themselves and their families safe. And pets and livestock were recognized to be a huge barrier to becoming safe living in rural communities. Neighbors were important for some of the participants. This woman said, living rurally, there's less visitors or people coming over. So I went and like talked to my neighbor, and I'm pretty sure that her husband was an abuser. She was kind of telling me her experience. That was my only resource, like in the country, that I could find. So she wasn't close with that neighbor, but she could go to her and talk to her and feel safe and knew she was understood. Community, and I love this one as well. This person said, I grew up with people who here now who have an auto mechanics business, and they really helped me out with the cost. Like they would only charge me for the part and not the labor, and I owe them big time because they helped me fix up my truck enough to trade it off for a better vehicle. And because she had that better vehicle, that was the only reason this woman was able to physically leave and keep herself and her family safe. And it was because someone she grew up with, knew sort of in the distance, that stepped up and did what needed to be done, made it possible. Workplace support. This person said, I had to tell my boss what I was going through at home, and I'm so grateful because she lived across the road from me at that time, and she would hear some of the arguments. She would help me financially with my job. I had to go down south and buy stuff. She would write up a travel form, and she told me, go down there, pick up your stuff. We will consider it as a work trip. So I wouldn't lose my wages. I wouldn't lose my time at work there, as it would be a travel day for me. She helped me in any way she could. And because of that, she was able to access lawyers. When she went to the bigger cities, she was able to access the support she needed, and she could still afford to do that because her employer did what needed to be done. So from workplace and employer, we're going on to pets who provided support. And I believe there's an argument to be made that this is a form of enacted support without question. This person, I did have 2 cats. They helped the kids take their mind off what was happening in the home. They enacted support for children, and there were quite a few research participants who talked about that. Another person said, I wasn't really a cat person, but they were little sweethearts, eh? They would cuddle you, and it was almost like they knew when you were having a bad day. They would come and sit with you or play with you, do whatever cats do. And that was a form of enacted support for this woman. It actually made the difference for her to managing through her life. Another example with pets, they, meaning the dogs, were super comfortable. While she was in the interview, the dog was on her lap. So she said, he's on my lap with his head on my shoulder, like, it's okay, Mom. It's fine. We've done this before. It's going to be okay. I love him to pieces. I can't go stay with a friend because I have 4 animals with me. So that is an inherent conflict. The dog, her pets provided support and comfort, but she wouldn't leave because she didn't have a place for the animals. Another woman said, the animals, are my life, and my world revolves around them. I don't think I would have been able to make it out or like keep going as much as I am now if I didn't have my dog with me. Livestock were also supports. One person said, I survived because of my horses, 100%, and my dogs, all of them. Well, you have horses. If you walk out there, they know if you're sad or if you're happy. So I would walk out and just sit there in the pasture, and they would all come up, and they know, right? And it gave me something to do with purpose and with positivity. I was off work for a year, and I was out there. That's always where I was. That was always where I was going, always with my horses or the dogs. They are why I survived. So I think that's an incredible example of enacted support, simply by the fact of the horse and the dog's presence enabled this woman to keep going and survive. I also love this example of an unexpected enacted support. Talking to his first wife. So this research participant spoke to her ex-partner's first wife, who reached out to her. When me and the ex were going through our stuff, she really reached out to me, telling me how their relationship went and how he would get physical with her. So this woman had support and understanding and knew what to expect and helped her make a decision more quickly. I just think that's a fantastic example as well of enacted social or natural support. Finally, I just want to highlight that social embeddedness can also limit options. And so what we think might be a natural support might actually work against a person. So this example, with family, it's tough. Family belief and what you were raised on, and to do something the total opposite is hard to accept. And I found that the toughest pill to swallow, to not do what my grandparents did, to not do what my parents did, and what our beliefs are as a family and what we believe in, and to do total opposite. And that actually limited her. She held off a lot longer because in her family, that was not the norm. That was not where she belonged. That was not what they did. We also found that workplace support might not always support. This person told her employer, who made a comment like, I had an awful fight with my husband last night. It was just terrible. Like those kinds of things almost like bait me into a conversation. I think if either one of them, meaning her two supervisors, would have taken me into a room and not an open cubicle work environment, and maybe asked them questions or just kind of followed up to make sure, everything was good, or offered resources, it would have been a different situation. So this woman felt like her supervisors kind of got it. She needed more support. And so my take is that it could be the employer was trying to support this person, but just didn't have the tools to do that. And there are some folks doing research on providing employers with those kinds of tools, but obviously not nearly enough, and not in the rural community. So finally, the last few slides, social embeddedness around religion. One person said that particular community is a very religious one. I brought it up there. I was usually met, and by it she means the fact that she was being abused. I was usually met with Bible verses about how divorce is evil, and like their version of help was telling me to stay, to stay. Sorry, that's a typo. Rather than actually, heaven forbid, challenging a man for doing the wrong thing. I wouldn't actually say I got any help when help seeking in the rural areas. And the religion was a big part of that. So I have a number of other quotes that say pretty much the same thing, met with Bible verses and told to stay because that was her role. And then finally, this person found her friend was a deterrent when she thought she might be a support. There was nowhere for me to go with horses, dogs, cats, and all the animals that I had. And if I'd walked out, they would all have been dead. I actually did contact a friend of mine. I asked, can I rent? And what she meant, a loft in the barn, and because there was space in the barn for the animals and a place for her to stay. So can I rent the loft and bring some of my horses and I'll work it off or do whatever? And she goes, no, I don't want to get involved. So I did reach out, but I had nowhere to go, nowhere that could accommodate me and all my animals. And there was no way I was leaving them because I knew I would never get them back. And a number of research participants had a story similar to that. Finally, social norms. Once it became clear to me that it was actually abuse, I told people, but generally the responses were things like, if it was someone who had experienced any kind of violence themselves, the attitude was kind of like, well, I've put up with it, why can't you? And I understand this might not be as unique to rural life, but we did hear quite a bit of that, and it does, and it'd be interesting to find out if that is stronger comment, because we know that is across the board, urban, rural, or otherwise, that is a norm for folks who are trying to get support to navigate domestic or intimate partner violence. So I'm going to conclude by saying that natural supports play a critical role for women in rural communities. They can enable someone to navigate situations of intimate partner violence and abuse, and they can impede a person's capacity to address the violence. So one of the recommendations from the research project is to educate, raise awareness, and access to learning about intimate partner violence. And the findings from this research project clearly show how important this is, particularly for those living in rural communities. So there's in the literature and in this current findings, strong argument for the continued development of funding of public awareness and education campaigns, and that they're essential. And other research projects have noted that many intimate partner violence many folks who experience IPV survive because of their friends, because of hairdressers who talk to them about it, a clerk at the post office, natural supports in the community that you wouldn't think would understand how to be a support, and they are. So there's a lot more we can do. And I want to just now go back to Resolve and just say community and research partnerships and networks like Resolve can have a big part to play in this. All of these research findings go right back to community, and they are started by community. And so these kinds of issues and immediacy are opportunities. So I really encourage anybody to reach out to, it doesn't have to be Resolve. There are a lot of researchers doing this work, but Resolve is certainly one strong network that particularly focuses on gendered violence and working with communities in doing this work. So the final report will be on the link when I send it out. And so that doesn't speak to natural supports in this way. That gives a final report on the Tri-Provincial project, but is still a really important and good bit of research. And I will have reference available in the slides when they're sent out. And this is it. And Crystal Heathbrick and myself would be the key folks to reach out, or Resolve to reach out.